It's my pleasure and honor to introduce our speaker. He is Congressman Tom Foley, a key man on the House Agriculture Committee, a forceful spokesman for rural development and the protection of regional water resources, and one of the bright young men of the Congress who has inspired a political following among Democrats and Republicans alike. Tom Foley is now serving his 5th term in the House of Representatives. He is 3rd in seniority on the 35-member House Agriculture Committee and is chairman of its important subcommittee on livestock and grains. He also serves on 4 key subcommittees of the House Interior. He is one of the youngest men ever to serve on the prestigious House Committee on Standards of Official Conduct, better known as the Ethics Committee. Tom Foley gained national recognition for his leadership in the enactment of the Wholesome Meat Act. He is a strong advocate of efforts to provide better farm income and improve the quality of life. No member of Congress could be more welcome to address the National Convention of the Farmers Union. With great pride and pleasure, I present to you Congressman Tom Foley of the state of Washington. Tom?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tony. It's always a great pleasure to have an opportunity to meet with members of the National Farmers Union, and especially an opportunity to be here at your 71st National Convention. I was a little surprised too, Mr. President, with the playing of the Battle Hymn of the Republic. Someone had asked me just before we came up what would be an appropriate song to play as we approached the podium, and I suggested Bow Down to Washington, a fight song of the University of Washington, my home school, but I thought after we played the Battle Hymn of the Republic, it was really a better choice. Bow Down to Washington might not be the best theme for the discussions that we're undertaking here today. There is an old story in Washington, D.C. that I want to tell about the young congressman that came to Washington and was wise enough to hire as one of his first staff members a very bright and able and articulate speechwriter. And the speechwriter did such a splendid job for the congressman that in a short time he became known not only in his home district but in the councils and halls of the government in Washington as a great comer in political life in this country. And after his first successful re-election by a large majority, the speechwriter came to the congressman and asked for a raise in pay. Was turned down rudely and abruptly by the congressman, said he was already overpaid, he shouldn't worry about his pay, he should get busy on that speech the congressman was going to make before a large audience in his home district. And so the speechwriter went away with his head hung low and prepared the speech, and it was given to the congressman as he boarded the plane, typed on the large speech typewriter. It was always such an excellent speech that on the basis of past experience, the congressman didn't even bother to read it. And he got up before the audience in his home district and began to read the speech. And the speech said that he, the congressman, had devised a means by which the United States could solve all of its domestic and foreign problems. It could meet the challenge at home to take care of those who were in poverty and the aged and provide education for every child as far as his talents could carry him, provide medical care and assistance, build the rural economy, take care of the problems of transportation, do away with the slums, build a national defense, and while doing this, aid developing countries around the world, protect our allies from invasion and aggression. And with all these marvelous achievements, he could cut taxes 50% across the board. And the audience gasped with anticipation. The congressman turned the page and said, "As you know, I've always spoken to you in particulars and never in vague generalities, and I have a specific 10-point program by which these wonderful accomplishments can be realized." And he turned the page and it was blank, and he turned another page and it was blank, and there in the handwriting of his speechwriter it says, "Now, you cheapskate, you're on your own." As we try to discuss the challenges facing agriculture in this very definite year of action of 1973, I feel a little bit like that congressman, very much on my own. That's not really true. We have in the Congress the support and counsel of great rural organizations and agricultural organizations like the National Farmers Union. But more than ever before, since I have been a member of Congress, we are going to need that counsel and assistance this year. The motto and slogan of this convention is 1973, the year of action. And that is indeed appropriate, because this year, by the end of this year, all the basic farm programs, of the major farm programs at least, expire. The wheat program, the feed grains program, the upland cotton program all expire in December of 1973. The Public Law 480 program, the so-called Food for Peace program, expires. The wool program expires. The Class 1 dairy plan expires. And the food stamp plan expires. And the agriculture committees of the House and the Senate are or will be involved very shortly in the difficult problems of reshaping and reenacting these programs. What I am concerned about, and very deeply concerned about, are the indications that have come from the President's speech of February 15th, and the statements that have been made by various administration sources, that the administration would like to phase out, over a period of 3 or 4 years, the income aspects of these programs. Now, their urging is that we have reached a point where the free market can determine the price of commodities in a way that will guarantee or assure farmers and ranchers in this country of a decent income and a decent share of the national economy. I'm encouraged, as I think most in this room are, by the high level of exports that we've enjoyed in the last year, sparked by the massive purchase of wheat and feed grains by the Soviet Union. Prices, particularly in grains, are at a near record level. This year we will see total agricultural exports exceed $11 billion, with all the significance that that has in helping redress our balance of payments problem. And the Secretary of Agriculture is happy to predict that by the end of 1975 or 76 or 77, we may see those exports reach a level of $15 billion. I'm delighted if that is true, and if that is in fact what we will see. And I hope that we will continue to have strong demand for our agricultural products abroad, and that will continue to reflect itself in more adequate price levels for our farmers and ranchers. But I'm skeptical. Even in the short time that I have served in the Congress, which is a period of only 8 years, I have seen 2 previous occasions where most of the experts thought that we would see strong demand that required the loosening of supply management controls and the expansion of acreage and set-aside. Let me cite those 2 examples for you. In 1966, it was assumed that India faced famine and that it was necessary for the United States to open its productive capacity and meet the needs of the Indian population and other populations in the world which might indeed face devastating famine without our assistance. That was a decision taken in deep and thoughtful consideration by Secretary Freeman. And I remember his consulting with many of us who came from rural areas about it, and his difficulty in taking any other course in order to avoid what would have been a terrible tragedy if the predictions had come true. But what in fact happened? The weather cycles in India were not easily predicted then, as they are not easily predictable now. And India had in 1967, 68, 69, 70, a remarkable favorable weather cycle. And with some reforms internally and with some new technology, India was able to announce in 1971 that it had reached sufficiency in wheat. And we had a world surplus of grains in those years. Another example was 1970, when the southern corn blight devastated our corn crop and resulted in a crop of only 4 billion bushels when our national needs were 4.4 as a minimum. So we relaxed again the set-aside and the production controls, and the following year we had a crop of 5.5 billion bushels, which was worth less than the previous crop had been worth. What I'm suggesting to you is that these rosy predictions, that there will be a continuing demand, that there will be a world shortage and high pressure on our producers to supply and high prices as a result, may not in fact be reliable predictions. I hope they are. But I'm concerned that we do not organize our farm programs or reorganize our farm programs based on the comfortable prediction that we will never again need supply management controls, that we will never again have problems of overproduction, that we will never again have slipping prices and low farm income crises in the United States. The reason I'm particularly concerned about those predictions is that we have faced for many years in Congress the disturbing reality that we cannot easily pass farm bills. The old days of the so-called farm bloc have long since disappeared. As more and more members come from suburban and urban areas, and more of those members have less immediate interest in the welfare of farmers and ranchers because they do not represent them, the passage of farm programs, the extension of existing farm programs, is a narrow, difficult, and very chancy legislative undertaking. We have passed some of our bills recently by as few as 12 votes majority in the House of Representatives. And I'm basically speaking of the House. The Senate is not as difficult a forum. We have 69 new members in the House of Representatives this year. We don't know how those members are going to respond to the need of extending these farm programs. We are faced with an extremely difficult legislative task in reenacting the basic farm legislation. Now, added to that, we have an administration that is sounding most unsympathetic to continuing the farm programs in their general outline as we've known them. And without the support, at least the acquiescence of the administration, any administration, the task of legislative enactment of farm legislation is almost hopeless. As I read the President's statements, and they are frankly vague and uncertain in their content, he's talking about getting the government off the farm. He's talking about phasing out the income supports of our farm programs over a period of 3 or 4 years. Perhaps high farm prices will be sustained for 3 or 4 years, which could make that phase out at least less onerous and difficult than it would otherwise be. But even so, I am concerned that any radical reduction in farm payment supports would have the effect of placing severe economic pressure on many of our farmers and ranchers who have in the past years developed their own plantings and their own local decisions based on the existence of these payments. The payments have worked themselves into the cost of their debt service, into the cost of land values, into the investments in machinery and fertilizer and so on. If they are phased out at the end of 4 years, and then there should be a crisis, and overproduction and surpluses return to plague us, I don't think Congress could be responsive enough, quickly enough, to save many of our farmers and ranchers from economic disaster. Another basic consideration, and as I understand it in the proposals of the administration, is to reduce the income benefits of farm programs so that there is more competitive demand for the use of land. But this does not work itself around the country in an even and balanced way. It's true that in some parts of the Corn Belt there are opportunities to plant soybeans instead of corn. In some areas of the South, in the Cotton Belt, soybeans can be substituted for cotton. But in the Great Plains states and in the Pacific Northwest, there is more rigidity built into the crop practices of those areas. In my own state of Washington and in Oregon and Montana, frankly, there are limited choices. The choices generally being limited to either planting wheat or planting barley. And this element of introducing competition for the use of land is not a real choice. Also, the administration is talking about going back to a concept of general cropland retirement. Now, we spent a great deal of time with that concept in 1969 as we were preparing to pass the 1970 Agricultural Amendments Act. And the administration itself, in the presence of Secretary Hardin, informed the Committee on Agriculture that their studies had indicated that general cropland retirement was not an efficient way to handle the problems of supply management, that it was costly, that it impacted some areas much more heavily than others. In fact, there had to be great care utilized in some parts of the country, lest the retirement of cropland destroyed the economic viability of many communities. But again, we are seeing a suggestion that this can be an alternative to existing farm programs. So as I look at this coming year, I think we are in the most critical period for the economic health of rural America that I have noted since I've been in the Congress and indeed served in Washington, which is about 12 years now. And I am concerned that there is not a sufficient recognition in the country of the critical character of the decisions that will be made by Congress and those proposals that are currently being advanced by the administration. The President uses very attractive terminology. He wants to get the government off the farm. He wants to give the farmer more flexibility. He wants to allow the free market to determine more farmer income. All those things are desirable. We all share that as an ultimate desire. But the reality is that I think we need the continuation of these farm programs. At the very minimum, we need the continuation of their legislative authority, so that if circumstances change and we need to have the strong input of economic incentives to farmers to control production, those authorities and those existing legislative mandates will be available to a Secretary of Agriculture that can be implemented immediately. If we fail to do that, if we phase out these programs over a period of 3 or 4 years, we will be destroying a legislative system of encouraging and developing the health of America's rural economy that dates back at least 42 years to the Agricultural Adjustment Act of 1929. Legislative programs that were built by hard experience and difficult and energetic effort by the rural agricultural community of this country. And I tell you again that if those programs are phased out and we reach a crisis in the late 70s or in the early 80s, we will be in a position, I'm afraid, not to be able to respond fast enough, and the result could be economic disaster in rural America. Now, some of the predictions of continued strong export demand, as I have said, are encouraging, and we would like to support in any way we can their continuation and expansion. We hope the Soviet Union does indeed continue to develop a program of utilizing feed grains to upgrade the diet of their citizens. They have been on a program for the last 5 years of increasing meat consumption and production in the Soviet Union, have had some success, increasing it from 1965 to 1971 by about 2 billion pounds. But the problem again remains that in Asia and in the Soviet Union, in China and in India, we have not yet seen the full development of the technology which exists to improve yields. Most of the studies by the Economic Research Service and the Food and Agricultural Organization indicate that the developed economies, agricultural economies of the world, have had a remarkable increase in production in the last decade or two, largely by the application of technology. They have increased their yields remarkably through the use of fertilizer and new strains and machinery. The development of increased yields increased production in the developing countries has been much less spectacular and has been in large part by bringing new land into production. But we cannot assume that the full utilization and adaptation of technology will not make remarkable strides, weather permitting, in countries like India, the Soviet Union, and China. Indeed, most of the experts predict that by 1980, the Soviet Union will be self-sufficient in wheat and feed grains. Over its great history, the Soviet Union has been a net exporter, not a net importer of wheat and feed grains. And the same thing is true in China. And in India, more attention to the technical problems of irrigation and the development of an extension service and the better application of new technology could result in strong increases of production in those countries. So while we hope for a continued high export demand, again, I think it is dangerous to depend upon it and to frame our agricultural policy as if that were inevitable. The political problem in Congress, as I've said, is a difficult one. It is not a party problem. Democrats and Republicans support the farm programs. Democrats and Republicans oppose them. But it is key to passing any farm program to get the support of at least elements of the urban and suburban community in this country, which in large part do not fully understand the relation of farm programs and farm prices, do not understand that the farm programs have been as beneficial to the consumer as they have been to the farmer. That message has never been adequately told. It is not being told today, unfortunately. But one thing that I want to commend the Farmers Union on, specifically and energetically, is its determination to keep contact with the great organs of organized labor. There is no reason why there should be a conflict between labor and the farmer. Indeed, they have common interests in building the economy of this country, and they can share common benefits from their cooperative efforts. There has been, unfortunately, on the committees in agriculture, a tendency for those committees, regardless of party, to be extremely conservative and to have, to some extent, a veneer of anti-labor attitudes. And yet, any time that I have been a member of the Congress, labor could have killed the farm program by raising its hand, by just simply saying it was opposed to extensions. Because there are sufficient members of both the House and the Senate whose constituencies do not include farmers and ranchers, but do include members of organized labor in great numbers. We have had the understanding and support of organized labor, those of us that represent rural areas. And that understanding and that cooperation is, again, a key element in building a strong rural economy. And of all the agricultural organizations of which I am aware, the most conscious of the need to maintain those beneficial contacts and cooperative efforts has been the National Farmers Union. What we do in the Congress and in the country this year will perhaps more than any other year bespeak the future of rural America. We have heard much talk in past years about the problems of the cities, and indeed there have been severe problems in urban America. But most of the bad housing, most of the low income, most of the poor medical care, most of the inadequate resources to provide quality life that are suffered in this country are still suffered in rural America. And we need the commitment to the strength and health of a rural economy and to those decent and underlying attitudes of concern by all Americans toward rural America and toward the problems of rural citizens. And although it is another subject in which I do not wish to expand this afternoon. I am deeply concerned that some of the programs and impoundments and actions of the administration are threatening the commitment, not just specific programs, but the commitment of this country to those who have not been able fully to participate in the economy and to bring for themselves and their family the fruits of prosperity and a decent life. And I want to see this country continue to commit itself to ensuring that all Americans have a decent opportunity for an adequate diet, for adequate housing, for adequate education for their children. We have made so much progress in the last decade that is still not fully realized by most of our citizens. Much has happened in this country of which we can be proud in bringing millions and millions of American families into the circle of a decent life and a decent opportunity for the future. And I want to again commend the Farmers Union for its strong support of that program and character of programs to bring decent benefits to American families throughout this country, regardless of region and regardless of background. I think we have to continue that commitment as well. We have the resources in this. And finally, I think we in the Congress have a responsibility, which we are undertaking, to examine our own procedures and practices. And I think that much has been accomplished in the last 2 months to bring the Congress, particularly the House, of which I am most familiar, into modern practices and modern organizational efforts to make us a more effective and responsive body. We've opened up our hearings and our meetings to the scrutiny of the press and the public, and I think this is a useful step. We've placed our powerful committee chairmen under some responsibility to be ratified by their colleagues and to have some limits, so to speak, on what was very great and not too restricted power in the past. We've developed a new committee to study the organization of the House itself and report back before the end of this session about modernization and streamlining, which I think will make us more effective in our work. The President has, in effect, laid down a challenge to the Congress. By his acts of impounding funds and by his administrative decisions, he has raised the specter of a challenge to the constitutional balance between Congress and the executive. I'm concerned that the President has moved too far and too fast in enhancing the powers of the presidency over the powers that I think rightly belong in Congress. But he may have done us a service in the Congress, unwittingly, in forcing us to look at our own organization, our own internal management, to come up with better and more effective ways to carry on our work. We need to have better overall control of the budget. We need to have a better mechanism of determining priorities within the Congress, and I think these are coming. But I would be concerned if we see the steady erosion of congressional authority, as it has gone on now for almost 3 decades, continue very far into the future. Because, as Alexander Hamilton said of the House of Representatives, here, sir, the people govern through their immediate representatives. I am not a wholesale or indiscriminate critic of the President of the United States. I think he has done some remarkable things, and he has achieved, particularly in foreign policy, some great movements toward opening up our contact with the Soviet Union and China that I think will be true records of achievement for his administration in the future. But if we do not insist on a balance between the responsibilities of Congress and the responsibilities of the executive and the judiciary, the great plan that was laid down of our forefathers in the 18th century could become seriously distorted. And that would be a great tragedy. With all due respect to our French visitors, I would not want to see the Congress of the United States become more in the pattern of a French National Assembly with a very strong presidency, not easily limited or constrained. Well, in all these difficult tasks, we have few resources, except those of ourselves in the Congress and those of our friends outside the Congress. And I have always counted especially helpful and especially important the friendship and counsel and advice that I have had from the National Farmers Union, from people like Tony Deschamps and Jim Patton, who is here with Mrs. Patton, your former president, great president, and from your exceptionally able staff in Washington, from Reuben Johnson, and from my great friend Weldon Barton, who served with me, as Tony said, as a congressional fellow before I was able to enthusiastically recommend him to this organization, and I think that recommendation has been well served. I want to tell you that, as I said before, we need your support in counsel and advice, and we need it actively, and we need it energetically as never before. I hope together that in 1973, the Congress and the great rural agricultural community of this country can insist and sustain their insistence that the future of rural America, the health, the prosperity, and the advancement of rural populations and farmers and ranchers, particularly in this country, is a key to the national economy and prosperity and an essential key to a bright and important future for this country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom Foley. I know he's got a press conference that he has to hurry to. We appreciate very much your coming. And Tom, thank you very much for the kind words about National Farmers Union and its efforts on behalf of not just farmers, but for all the people of this country and the world. We appreciate it.